Thank you so much for being here tonight, everybody, first of all. There's a lot of great energy in the room, and we're glad that you've made it out. This is the first night of 7 events, and so the first thing I want to say is I hope as many of you as possible will find time to come back to the other events that we've planned, which you probably already know about. If you signed up for one, you saw all the others already. My name's Matt Griffith. I'm an architect at In Situ Studio, and it is my job tonight to just kind of introduce you in general to what the workshop is, the Real Matter workshop, and thank a whole bunch of people. So I'll try to do that quickly and then turn it over to the real show. Real Matter is something that our office cooked up about 1.5 years ago. We did the first version of this, the first annual workshop, last summer at this exact same time, and this is the second version. So we still have a few kinks to work out, of course, but this year's been a lot easier so far. And just in case you guys are wondering what the Real Matter workshop is, I wanted to tell you just kind of about 3 things about it that'll kind of explain what we're doing as an office over the next 2 weeks with a group of students who are in town, mainly from out of town. The first thing is the workshop itself, and the idea that we had initially was to bring talented young architecture students and other design students and young architects to Raleigh from all over the country to, in a very kind of naive way in some ways, study the city and understand the city, and with fresh eyes, identify things that are going great here and also things that aren't going so great, focusing specifically on downtown. And the workshop part of this is really a 2-week design studio that these students partake in, that's led by us and other designers in the community. That's a really intense design charrette, kind of uncovering these issues and then proposing what-if solutions to them. And so at the end of this 2-week workshop, there's actually going to be work that the students have done that will be presented at a First Friday event that we'll tell you about a little bit later. I did, with the kind of describing the workshop portion, want to introduce this year's cohort. And they're probably the most important people to thank in the room. This year we've got 15 folks from all over the country, from several different universities and a couple offices who have decided to be here with us for 2 weeks. Which is pretty exciting. It's an act of faith because they have no idea what they're in for. They're all, or most of them, are sitting right up here in the front. And so if y'all could stand up, I'm going to do this every night, by the way. It's put you on the spot. If you could stand up. This is the 2022 Real Matter cohort. And if you guys are, y'all can sit down now. Good job. That was great. Passed the first test. If any of y'all are ever interested in what we're doing, we're actually going to be leading this studio in the work hall, which used to be right back there, but is now in the space directly above Foundation Bar, which I know you all know where that is. And we're going to be in there pretty much all day, every day for the next 2 weeks. And the students, whether they realize it or not, will also be in there at night sometimes working on things. So just drop in and see what we're doing if you're curious. The second part of the workshop that we dreamed up 1.5 years ago was we needed some sort of, in addition to our voices and the voices of our colleagues in town offering critiques at pinups and stuff, we wanted to have some sort of a robust curriculum for the participants. And so when we started to reach out to people in the community to gather folks to give talks or whatever it might be, we realized pretty quickly that there was an appetite in the design community and in other communities in Raleigh for a really robust design lecture series. And so we realized we changed tact from approaching people to help us to really asking people to sponsor a lecture series. And so the lecture series, which this is the first night of, really kind of took on a life of its own, and we realized that we were going to receive enough financial support from amazing sponsors to actually be able to put on a lecture series that really rivals that of a university, like what a university would have for a year. And so the lecture series, which was originally a curriculum for the workshop participants, has really turned into an opportunity to have a really robust conversation about Raleigh, about downtown Raleigh, about what's good here, about what's not, about what role design could play in addressing some of these issues. So this year's lecture series, which is called City Conversations, is intended to be exactly that. We want it to be an opportunity for folks like you to come hear great ideas, We are going to save time at the end for conversation and open dialogue and debate. It got pretty feisty last year, so we're hoping for that as well. And it's really important that as many people come as many nights as they possibly can so that there's some degree of continuity. I will say if there was one complaint about last year, or one thing we didn't do well, it's that we had the community in the room for the first 2 nights, for tonight and the panel discussion, and we had all the architects in the room for all the architecture lectures, but the two didn't intermingle. And so we're really hoping that this year everybody, all groups, can find the time to come to as many of these as possible. We also understand that not everyone has the stamina for 7 events and 10 nights. Our office is unique in that way. We're gluttons for punishment, but we hope you'll come to as many as possible. So just running really quickly through the other nights. Tonight's the first night of what we're calling the State of the City, and we're going to hear in a second briefly from Nick Neptune and then from Jonathan Melton. And tonight's meant to be equal parts pep rally and critique about Raleigh, and so we hope you've already kind of sensed that energy. Tomorrow night, State of the City Night 2 is a panel discussion led by Jake Heffington of Diversify Architecture, also a former member of our office, which is featuring folks who each have a expertise in a stressor that Raleigh is facing right now. So that should be a really engaging and informative panel. And then we get into what you might call the more formal architecture lectures, but we've worked really hard to bring people here who aren't just running normal practices like ours. They're running really innovative practices, each one of which has a really unique social bent. So Johanna Herme from Winnipeg, who's in addition to being an incredible designer, her firm has been a social instigator about conversations about the future of Winnipeg, including planning a huge dinner on a bridge for 1,500 people where everybody got together and just talked about what was happening in the city. David Sider is after her. He's a landscape architect who works on all kinds of socially relevant projects in New York and around the country. And then Niraj Bhatia from San Francisco. He has offices in San Francisco and Toronto. And they really research social issues and produce incredibly beautiful design responses and graphic representations of these issues. If you're interested in graphic design at all, that would be a really good one to come to. It's also Friday night, so you can have like extra beers. And then on next Monday, is Ifeoma Ibo, who works on social and racial equity in design and looks at how architecture has addressed those issues or not in the past and how it can address those issues now and in the future. And then last but not least, Hector Barroso from Mexico City, who we have one lecturer every year who we just invite because they do really beautiful work, and that's what he does. So if you're way into that, he's last. That one is the only virtual event. All the others will be live and in person. Great. So the last thing is to thank a few people. First, we want to thank the cohort again for being here. Y'all are brave. Thank you. Just to put a fine point on that, they're about to go into most of them are about to go into another semester of architecture school, and some of them are working actively in offices right now, and they have chosen to pay tuition to do 2 weeks of fun and challenging work right before they go back to school or right before they go back to their offices, right? So this deserves real kudos. Also want to thank the other members of our studio, of our office. They're all here somewhere. We're all wearing shirts that look like this, so if you can't really see what's on it, it's black on black. But just look for shirts like this. I see Zach back there, Jazz, Brittany, Megan, and Jeremy are all kind of back in the back. We're all really shy. I'm ready to get out of here for sure. And you can just look for black shirts that you can't quite see the logos on. And then also want to thank all of the wonderful folks who are here tonight. So we had kind of a group of people here tonight who are all engaged in really important things in our city. People who are making our city a wonderful place. And you know, the energy in the room is thanks to them, and we appreciate all the time you put into setting up models and playing music and bringing your records and everything else. And then last but not least, I want to thank one individual. That's Nick Neptune. He's standing over here behind Jonathan in the hat. Nick was a partner with us last year in helping us plan these first 2 nights, and he did this again this year. And for those of you who know Nick, it's impossible to stand up here and describe who Nick is in the city, because Nick does pretty much everything in the city. Nick is responsible for the energy in the room tonight. He's been an incredible partner doing this. He gave the State of the City address last year, so Jonathan, you've got your work cut out for you. He's like a preacher up here, so get ready. And we're really thankful for you, Nick. So with that was way too long. I'll hand the mic over to Nick. He's going to introduce Jonathan. Thanks for being here.
Look at us, Matt. On time. Having a good time. Come a long way since 2021. Good evening and welcome to the State of the City, the kickoff signature event to In Situ Studios' 2-week design forum hosted in the capital city of Raleigh, North Carolina, one of the fastest growing cities in our country today. My name is Nick Neptune, and it is my pleasure to receive you tonight as the founder of Good Times Assurance Company, a presenting partner with the In Situ Studio family in organizing this evening's event. It is also my privilege to welcome you as the Director of Outreach and Community Engagement for the Dorothea Dix Park Conservancy, the City of Raleigh's nonprofit partner in building America's next great urban park right here in our backyard. You know, for all of this emphasis on greatness, whether it be in our parks, our cities, or our scientific and technological achievements, one could hardly be forgiven. One could hardly be blamed for feeling a little less than great right now. Feeling less than great during an era of extraordinary challenge. From COVID-19 to climate change, inflation, the war in Ukraine, democracy on the brink, the violence against women, both physical and seemingly codified in our laws. But you see, that's what makes tonight so critical, so important, so urgent. We start the conversation by acknowledging the truth of our past and our present, so that in turn we may have an honest dialogue around what we can do to achieve a better future for ourselves, for our children, and for our community. This has been the work from one generation to the next. I stand here before you tonight as living proof of that work, of that sacrifice. You see, my friends, it's too easy to say, why bother? Why try? Feels so helpless, so hopeless. I say to that we bother, that we try, that we hold on to hope. Because generations past chose not to lose faith, chose not to lose hope in our common sense of decency and humanity. Let us continue that work. Let us renew our faith. Let us act with integrity and create spaces of inclusion. Let us listen to the women in our lives and trust them to know what's best for their bodies. Let's work together and tonight to start building a better city and a better community for each other. With that, I would like to extend my deep gratitude and my thanks to all the partners that have come together to demonstrate our present and future opportunities right here in our backyard. Zakiya Wiggins with NC NOMA and Diversify Architecture, my friends and colleagues with, yes, please, a round of applause. My friends and colleagues with the Dorothea Dix Park Conservancy, our very own DJ, Devin Tuttle, Tuttle Recall, I see you, Mr. Tuttle. The photographer, designer, Jared Harbor of Oaks and Spokes, and a co-founder of Oak City Cycling, the bike shop. Our future marketplace vendors, King Akira, Lo-Fi Candles, and Thirsty Pigeon Records, many thanks to all of you. The exceptionally talented artist and designer, Katie Stewart. I know Katie Stewart somewhere around here. Y'all make some noise for Katie Stewart. Last but not least, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for showing up tonight. We all have a role to play, whether it's in the streets, in the boardrooms, the city council chambers. It's on us. If we want better, it's up to us to do better. With that, please make some noise for my friend, City Councilman Jonathan Melton.
Good evening, everyone. I wasn't sure when I came up here whether I was going to walk with the mic or stand behind the podium. I think I'm going to do the podium. I also wanted to say that when they asked me to speak, they said it should be part inspirational pep rally and part informative. But I think Nick handled the inspirational pep rally piece. So typically you never want to talk after Nick Neptune, but I feel a little less pressure now because at least we got the pep rally out of the way. My name's Jonathan Melton. I'm one of the at-large city council members. That means I represent the whole city. I never thought I would hold elected office. I ran for the first time in 2019 because I felt, quite honestly, dissatisfied with the direction I felt the city was going. I think we have limitless potential in Raleigh, and I felt it was time for new leaders to step forward and help us reach that full potential. I've never been the type of person that waits for somebody else to raise their hand. I feel like if you feel a void and you feel compelled to fill it, then you step forward and you try. So I won my race in 2019, and it has certainly not been the term I expected when I ran. Despite that, though, I think we've gotten a lot of good work done, and I'm really happy to be here this evening to talk to you about it. When I was first asked to talk, they initially told me I had to speak for 45 minutes. I'm not going to, but my first thought was, despite being a lawyer and politician, I don't think I've ever talked for 45 minutes, and so that seemed impossible to me. But then I started thinking about all of the work we've accomplished over the past 2.5 years, and it's a lot. And I thought, well, maybe I do need 45 minutes, but I'm not going to take that long. But if I think about everything we've done, I can kind of put it into, I guess, 3 big categories. So we've got equity and access, housing, and multimodal transportation and transit. So I do want to take a minute to sort of walk through those things and sort of highlight the work we've done, because I think when we're looking at the state of the city, we need to take stock of where we are and what we've accomplished, and then look to what we're going to be doing next. So for equity and access, something I campaigned on and I was very proud that we were able to accomplish fairly early on was we created a police advisory board, something that I know the community has been asking for a while. We actually approved and started that process before the murder of George Floyd, and it became even more important that we had that in place after the murder of George Floyd and everything we saw over the summer into the fall of 2020. We created the Acorns unit, which is a police unit that works with social workers instead. So they now have social workers on staff that they will be sending with police officers for certain calls. Quite frankly, I think it's a good start, but it's not enough. I would like to see the unit pivot into a situation where we're not sending armed officers for every call. Having spoken to the chief and some of the police officers, I understand their concern that sometimes you need an officer there to clear the scene first. But I also serve as the liaison to our police advisory board, and some of their members have said when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I think that's true as well. And so I would like to see us pivot to a model where we're more proactive and we're sending social workers and unarmed civilians on certain calls, and I think we will get there. We are also in the process of looking at our 911 call data to figure out alternative responses and other ways to be helping the community, and so that work will continue. We passed a comprehensive non-discrimination ordinance with Wake County, which protects a whole bunch of folks from discrimination that was not protected before, and I'm very proud of that. We eliminated the 2-week sign-up requirement to speak to council. For whatever reason, the city council for a long time had this requirement that you had to sign up 2 weeks in advance to speak at a council meeting. I don't know who's thinking 2 weeks before a council meeting to sign up to speak. I don't think anybody is. Quite frankly, I think sometimes folks don't even know there are council meetings happening, and they certainly don't know 2 weeks in advance. So eliminating that requirement, I think, was important. There was also an old rule that you could not address council members directly. We took that out as well. So now you can come to city council, call us out directly by name. Folks take full advantage of that. That's been put to good use. We have included renters in all city notice requirements for the first time. It used to just be property owners, and I felt that was very important because I think I've heard some stat that 50% of our city is renters. I used to be a renter, so I think that was very important. And then a big thing and a big initiative is our transit has been running fare-free since 2020, and we just approved it fare-free again. So it will continue to run fare-free for another year through at least, yes, that's exactly right, through at least the end of June 23. And I can tell you for so long as I'm on city council, I'll be pushing for it to be fare-free indefinitely. Housing is a big one, and I'll just sort of walk through some of these, but we approved and placed on the ballot in 2020 an $80 million affordable housing bond, which voters overwhelmingly passed by 70% margin. And that's already helping. It's already helping to create some affordable units. One of the first projects that we invested in from the affordable housing bond was helping with the Healing Transitions expansion, which happens to also be on the Dix Park property. So I think it's important that we remember places like Healing Transitions that help folks who are dealing with substance abuse and homelessness when we talk about a park for all. I think that that is extremely important, especially remembering the history of the Dix Park property. But quite frankly, money is not enough to address affordable housing and housing affordability. Folks often talk about 3 big buckets. You have to have subsidy, which the bond will help with, supply, and then stabilization. As far as supply is going, we've done a lot of zoning work, working on legalizing different forms of housing. And when I was writing this down, that I think was the first time I realized how odd it is to say that we've legalized housing. I don't know why anybody thought it was a good idea decades ago to make certain types of housing not legal. That makes no sense to me. A lot of the housing that we've legalized already exists in some of our oldest, most treasured and historic communities and neighborhoods. It's because it predates the zoning code. And so just allowing that housing to come back is really just kind of going back to a way we used to do things before we became so regulatory driven. And a lot of the housing that we've legalized are tiny homes, accessory dwelling units, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, quads, small-scale apartment complexes, things that are affordable for folks at different price points and that used to be able to be built by right and exists in neighborhoods, single-family homes next to duplexes, next to small-scale apartments. If you want to see some examples of it, just go to Oakwood. Folks talk about Oakwood all the time as being this great historic neighborhood, and all of that housing already exists there. And so I hope to see more of it across our city. A big thing we did is we eliminated parking minimums and we established parking maximums, which I know there is some confusion about what that means. We did not eliminate parking in the city of Raleigh. We eliminated the prescriptive mandate on how much parking must be built. And I think that's important. And then we also established maximums. So if you're going to build more parking than is allowed, then you're going to have to mitigate it by having green infrastructure or electric vehicle charging stations, putting it in a deck that's wrapped if it's in an urban setting. I think Zach's here somewhere. He's back there. And he sent me an article when he saw that we eliminated parking minimums with a smiley face. And when I saw him for the first time after that, he said, "This is good. We can build a real city now." And I think that's exactly right. And then the last thing I want to touch on is multimodal transportation and transit. This is something that's really important to me, and I know important to a lot of folks in the room, especially the Oaks and Spokes folks who I know are here somewhere. Simple things like we brought back the scooters, which help folks get to the first and last mile connection. I cannot tell you how many times I ride on a scooter. Matt was joking with me that folks in the room, they were asking how I wanted to be introduced. I was like, just say my name and I'll just come up here. They're like, well, you'll be the guy that everyone sees in his suit scootering around town. And I think that's probably how some people know me. We've invested more money into bike lanes and protected bike lanes. We have our first parking protected bike lane on West Street down near Glenwood South, which is, I think, really important, investing money in multi-use paths, implementing the Wake County Transit Plan, including bus rapid transit. Our first bus rapid transit line will break ground this summer. If you don't know what bus rapid transit is, folks describe it as light rail on wheels, light rail on wheels. It's got its own dedicated lane. It gets queue jumping and signal priority, so it's not waiting in traffic. It's going to be an articulated bus, so the longer buses, you can bring your bike, you can bring strollers, you don't have to break them down. I know that's an important distinction, especially for young families. And we're working on that connection to transit, that first and last mile connectivity, so more sidewalks, making it safer for folks to get to public transportation. And I know that's a lot. I didn't even touch on everything, but that's a lot. And so then I think we have to think about what's next. For me personally, I can tell you what I'm really motivated to look at in the future is trying to continue to reduce car dependency, putting goods and services closer to people. In our existing neighborhoods, I think that's going to mean things like corner stores, accessory commercial units, farmers markets. And then in new developments that we're building, we have to reduce sprawl and we have to reduce car dependency, which is going to be focusing on mixed-use developments and a lot more density on our transit lines. And then I think the big challenge for Raleigh, and probably every city in the country right now, every growing city at least, is housing affordability. I don't think anybody has solved the affordable housing or housing affordability issue or crisis. If anybody has solved it or figured it out, we'd all just be doing it. I hope Raleigh is the city that can solve it, but I am certain that we are not going to solve that problem doing things the exact same way that got us into this mess. This is an issue that built up over decades, and we have to be willing to try new things, to be willing to learn, fail, and try again, and that is what I'm committed to doing. But those are just my ideas. I'm sure if I pass this microphone around the room, we could come up with a ton of ideas of what's next in the city of Raleigh. And I think that's what's really great about being here. My husband, Stefan, and I, he's in the back of the room right there. Stefan, you can wave there. We just came back from Miami. And it was interesting because someone at the hotel asked us where we're from, and I said Raleigh, North Carolina, and the person at the hotel said, oh, this must be a really big change from where you're from. And at first I was like, that's a weird thing to say to a guest. And then also, I was like, not really. I mean, the beach in Miami is great, but we have the restaurants and we have the culture and amenities. We have some really cool places in the city like Transfer Co. that we're in right now. But Raleigh is still becoming what we're going to be. It's a great place to live and work right now, but we're still becoming what we're going to be, which makes it a really exciting time to be here, I think. And I think it's a really exciting time to be on city council, to be working in the community, and to be attending forums and conferences like is going to be put on over the next 7 days. And so I would think that the charge for everyone in the room should be, what do you want Raleigh to be? I think it's going to take all of us together. And so while we're here tonight and over the next 7 days, I think we think about that, we come up with our best ideas, and then as a community, we make it happen. And that's what I'm committed to do. And so I look forward to the folks in the room who I don't know getting a chance to engage with you more this evening, have those conversations, and come back together and have that discussion of where are we going, because I think that's really important. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions, or I'm not sure. There was a whole criticism piece that was about to happen, so I'd like to leave the stage before that goes. Or I'm happy to stand up here while we do that. I can hear you. I think so. Yeah, so when I say, so the question was about regulations that are driving up housing costs for folks, especially like in bigger developments, apartment complexes, stuff like that. So the subsidy piece is actually direct investment to help lower the cost of housing is kind of how I was thinking about it. So we have our affordable housing bond. We also have separate from that, I think it's a 1 cent sales or tax that generates, I think, about $7 or $8 million a year. So that helps to do like the low-income housing tax credit projects or land banking or land swaps, where we can like anything we can do to reduce the cost. So an investment into the construction of the housing itself. The part about the regulatory issues driving up the cost of housing, I kind of see that almost on the supply side about how can we increase the amount of housing that's out and also make it easier to build it. So, I mean, one example, and it doesn't apply to like the big apartments that you were talking about, but accessory dwelling units, for example. Before we made the change to allow accessory dwelling units by right through just a simple permitting process, they were allowed in Raleigh through a more burdensome process, which was like basically it's called an overlay district. So you have to like get your neighbors to all agree that you could do it. Then you have to go down to City Hall to get some special zoning district that laid over the land. So then you could do the permitting. And so all of that, quite frankly, the entire time it was through an overlay process, there were no ADUs that were built because it's expensive to build them anyway. And we're working on that because we're working with the design community to come up with plans that can be posted on the city website. So a normal person who doesn't have a construction or design background can just go there and cut that step out. But pivoting to allowing it by right, it takes a lot of the process out. You don't have to hire a land use attorney to help you petition your neighbors to help you get an overlay district. But the issue with the larger apartment complexes and stuff, if it's market rate and there's not a lot available, I think that's increasing price. And so if we can get some more market rate stuff out there, I think that'll help. But then I also think that direct subsidy is what really helps drive down the cost too. So if, for example, the city owns a bunch of land, and something we've been working on recently is pivoting our city-owned land for long-term land leases for things like affordable rentals. apartments and duplexes and triplexes and quads. So I think it's a puzzle, and I don't think anyone's figured it out, but we're trying to put the pieces together.
Just go ahead. Here we go.
It did for a second. Do you want me to just bring this mic out there? Do you want to come up here?
So my question is, I was really a banker, but I understood that banks really have an acquisition of household mandate. I understand as a banker that there is not a wealth gap, there's an education gap for a lot of individuals who want affordable housing. So in my mind, I was thinking, why aren't we bringing together entities like Triangle Family Services or Operation Hope and really pumping knowledge into our communities to prepare people for the affordable housing that we're building? Because they would come to my office and they say, Nisi, I got my credit fixed. And I say, yeah, just the number, but your mindset's still wrong. So what can the council do about informing and educating people, one, who don't even know they don't know, and allowing all of these separate opportunities and entities that we have that have the information, including the bank, to bring that information to the people who truly need it in a way that they will be intrigued enough to receive it? That's my question.
No, it's a great question, because a lot of the times I worry that the work that we're doing is not getting out into the public. And for example, I think next week or in 2 weeks, there is at Chavis Park going to be an affordable housing conference or seminar where we're going to talk about how to get housing, or the steps and what work's been done. And the question that you asked about bringing all the right people together, that's happening. But people may not know about that. And it's also tough to ask people to go to a certain place at a certain time to get the information, because you have folks that work different jobs, have kids, multiple jobs. And so we have to do a better job of figuring out how to meet people where they are. And I think that is a really big, heavy lift, because I think for a really long time, the city has done things only a certain way, and we have to do things in a new way. And we have to do things in a new way coming out of a global pandemic where we weren't able to interact or engage at all. And so that is going to be a huge challenge. And I know one thing we just funded is a community engagement bus. That's literally, the intent is to go out into communities that are traditionally disengaged or disinvested and meet people where they are. We've talked about our Digital Connectors program, which helps teach computer literacy and provide some broadband access and internet access, coupling that with the community engagement bus. But we really have to figure out how to meet people where they are. We have an Office of Community Engagement now and a Community Engagement Board that I think is going to help us embed that into all of our departments and processes. But it is certainly, that is a new way of doing things that we have to get right.
Well, this is not a critique. I am not in the quartet of chaos. I'm volunteering to be in the Symphony of Solutions. So I really appreciate you answering that question and knowing that there is something that I can volunteer to be a part of with all this free time I have now.
I love that. Let me get your contact information. I also really like the Symphony of Solutions, which you may start hearing me repeat that, and I will give you credit. Zach, do you want me to just start passing the here? Okay.
Do you have programs to engage landlords to help them to provide subsidized housing if they're interested?
I don't think so right now. One of the things that we're working on, so it's sort of like a multi-tiered process. I guess I could just stay over here. We did a lot of the zoning reform. That was first. Now we need to figure out how do we incentivize getting the housing actually built and on the ground. And so I think some of it is an education component, letting folks know what is available. And then I think some of it is going to require some investment. And it could be little things like the city right now, like I said, is collecting the design templates for accessory dwelling units so that folks who want to build an accessory dwelling unit don't have to hire, no offense, an architect to get the plans. The plans will be available online, and then they just have to get them financed and built. But I have seen some other jurisdictions do some really cool stuff, like using the accessory dwelling unit example. If I were to build an accessory dwelling unit in my backyard and then make it as an available rental at an affordable price point, like 50, 40, 30% area median income AMI, that I could get a low interest rate loan or a grant or a forgivable loan to build it. Because even building an accessory dwelling unit is probably going to cost more than $100,000. Most people don't have that money sitting around. But if they can get a loan or a grant and then offer that as an affordable rental to a first responder or someone who's trying to get on their feet and get housing, I think that's going to be really important. So the zoning reform took us 2 years to get through, and now we got to figure out how do we educate folks to build affordable rentals, and how can we incentivize it also. And I think that's going to be the next step.
I'm a long-time downtown Raleigh resident, and I live in Mordecai, and it's completely changed. And I understand that's a big problem, but also a blessing. Do you have, as a council, any, are you looking at the gentrification issue and how it's pushing out middle-class families? Because also I teach downtown, and I've seen my students be pushed out also, and it's becoming a bigger problem. I know there's no easy solution, but is it on your radar, and do you have any plans?
So when I first started talking, I said how I never thought I would be in elected office, but I felt compelled. That is a big part of why I ran. So when I moved back to Raleigh after school, I was working for the state of North Carolina. It was a great job. I did not make that much money. And I had student loan debt and credit card debt. I really struggled to find anything I could afford to rent. I was working downtown. I wanted to live downtown. I couldn't find like a garage apartment or a basement apartment, which are accessory dwelling units. I didn't know that at the time, but they also weren't quite legal, so that's why we didn't have a lot. My friends at the time were living in DC and other places renting those types of units. I couldn't find like a duplex or a single room to rent. And so I kind of lucked into my house, which is in Southeast Raleigh. The landlord at the time knew someone I went to college with. He rented it to me really low, and I lived there and rented it for a long time. And then when I had enough money, I was able to buy it, and I lived there since. But I think that's a lot of what we're seeing is there's just immense pressure in the city right now, and it's a multi-tiers problem. I think first, and I will just be very frank, there are parts of the city that were closed off or fought off development for a very long time. They fought off change. And so what happened is new residents, folks like me, young professionals, young families, they all flocked to areas of the city that were traditionally less expensive and less invested in. And that is quite frankly Southeast Raleigh and every area around there. And so the folks who were there for a long time are now at risk of displacement and gentrification because there's just all of this pressure and it's all flooding into certain parts of the city. And so I don't have a solution to the problem. I can tell you that I was a symptom of the problem myself. It's why I ran for office, and it's a big part of why I want to continue to do this work, because we have to solve it. We can't grow as a city by pushing out everybody who's been here or pushing out folks that are the wage workers. And like we have to have a diverse group of residents in the city, and we have to make space for everybody. And so I think it, again, goes back to increasing supply, making sure that all parts of the city are open for new housing development, so it's not a flood of pressure into Southeast Raleigh. But the unfortunate part is there's this backlog, because this is built up over decades, that it's just sort of flooding in right now. And so we just have to somehow mitigate it. And that is, I think, that's the big pressure point. That's what we really need to figure out.
Thank you, Councilman. Just a quick sort of maybe point of clarification. The councilman, I think, is exerting a degree of modesty when he says he doesn't have a solution. You know, the impression that I'm under is that this council, with Jonathan Melton there at the helm, is exerting itself in trying to identify a whole toolkit of approaches at addressing our stock and supply of housing. I think perhaps right now for many of us the sense is that we're getting a lot of luxury housing, lots of gold-plated condos and this and that and the other, but this city council, by addressing zoning, by literally passing text changes that would allow for a whole variety of different types of housing that we used to enjoy as a community, right? Reinvesting in that. I think it's like, in other words, we're doing everything we can, right, to use every tool in the toolkit to create housing stock and supply for a whole range, right, of affordability. Now, if I may, I'd like to ask the councilman if he would feel comfortable speaking to a pilot program that the city has launched to address the immediate and near-term concerns of those who are being displaced today. Because I think it's one thing to have a conversation about what we're trying to do with, changing the text and development code and making these long-term investments in transit, expanding both transportation and housing options along the way. But that takes years to put into place. But as I understand it, we have recently begun leveraging let's say, $1.5 million in a community support fund to support folks in trying to, keep them in their homes, right, in neighborhoods that are proximate to these major capital investments. I wonder if the councilman could speak to that.
Yeah, we're doing a lot. And I think when I was saying we haven't figured it out is because until we actually can provide safe, stable, and affordable housing for everybody, we're going to have to keep working on it. And I think it is a huge puzzle that we're trying to put together. And I do hope that Raleigh can be the city that cracks the code and then everyone can just copy us. Because like I was saying, I think if any city had figured it out, we'd be copying them. But we are doing a lot. We have money to help keep folks in their home. I think we've allocated every dime that we've gotten from the federal government in COVID funds. We bought a hotel to help try to house some folks. I don't think it should take a global pandemic for the state and the federal government to give us money that we need to help with housing and transit and all of those things. We got it because of COVID, but quite frankly, I think cities are ill-equipped from a budget standpoint to do as much as they can if we had more money. And so I think a lot of that comes to lobbying the legislature and the federal government, but that's a whole nother soapbox. But simple things too. For decades, the city's owned a bunch of land. If you look out that window right there, there's some grass on a hill. The city owns that, has been empty for decades and decades. We're moving that into production for affordable rental units. I think that one's gonna be maybe a small apartment complex, but we're earmarking all of that for affordable at 30% AMI or less. So just doing things like leveraging city-owned land and offering it up for long-term land leases so we can control the affordability and not have it be affordable for the first owner and then it flips and then it's not. Like if we keep it a long-term land lease, we offer it up for a request for a proposal, folks build affordable rentals on it, we can control that longer. I think we just recently awarded Southeast Raleigh Promise, I think, maybe 26 city-owned lots for some affordable rentals. So we have to Nick's point, yes, we're doing everything we can. We've used every tool or idea that I've heard of, that I've read on Strong Towns or some blog. If anybody in this room has an idea, bring that forward. We'll try that too. Like that is the mindset we have to have.
Hey, as a capital city, Raleigh has a lot of state-owned and sometimes federally owned buildings and properties, especially downtown, that have one small building, sometimes no buildings on them. Are there any efforts by the council to sort of look at those properties again and find ways of actually, turning that back over to the city as opposed to just sort of parking and, you know?
I hesitate talking about this because every time I try to bring it up, someone tells me to be quiet because it's like trying to catch like a rabbit. If you move too fast, it runs away. There's a really big piece of property on Newbern along our bus rapid transit line that would be fantastic to have. It used to be the DMV. It's state-owned. I think if we're trying on that. To your point, it frustrates me. I tell my husband this all the time. We walk or scoot everywhere we can. And to walk by just these like massive surface parking lots, gravel parking lots, buildings that are only occupied from 9 to 5, maybe Monday through Thursday. It is everything we're trying to do to increase housing supply, to have more walkable downtown, walkable city, green space. It's so hard because we're like there's like a huge weight strapped to our feet, and it's all the state-owned property. One thing that the prior administration, Governor McCrory talked about was this Project Phoenix, about trying to turn some of the state-owned properties into mixed use or offload them for housing or whatever. Quite frankly, it's probably one of the few things I agreed with Governor McCrory on, and it's not seeming to be a priority on the current administration, but maybe. But I hear you, and if we could take over some of that property, I mean, that was what I was saying too about the direct funding from the federal government and some of the state government for COVID. I don't think it should take a global pandemic for them to offer some support. And even if the state could offer up some land and say, here, we'll give you the land, put housing on it, I think that would be fantastic. But I don't know, maybe I'm sure they have other priorities that are distracting them. So, but we're trying.
Mentioned that a lot of affordable housing is based off of, like the price is kind of based off of the AMI. And I was wondering, with a lot of the neighborhoods that are going through gentrification, that median increases, is there something to kind of better regulate the affordable housing price, or does that make sense?
Yeah, so the area median income is set by, it's like some mathematical tax equation about, I think anything technically affordable housing, it starts at like 80% AMI, but 80% AMI, folks who make that, like quite frankly, that's not who you really think of when you think of the need for affordable housing. When you get down to like 40, 30 is, that's like the folks that deeply need housing assistance. Was the question about the existing housing, is there a better way to? Yeah, it's set based on the assessment, and it does change when new stuff is built and the value increases and stuff. But the AMI is set on the income. It's the area median income, so it would be what folks make, and then looking at the factor of how much they were supposed to be spending on housing or not. And so, you know, for areas that are experiencing a lot of gentrification, I think one thing in that area that's tough is what we see is folks that have been there a long time end up getting priced out of their own homes. And so some of the stuff that we have programs available are like owner-occupied rehabilitation assistance. So like if you have things that need to be upkept in your house or money you need to put in, you can get assistance from the city and I think the county to do that so that you're not in a situation where you get like a lien against your property or nuisance or something like that, or the cost of the repair becomes so prohibitive that you have to sell it. The other flip side of that is there are folks that may be interested in cashing in on their generational wealth. Like you may have owned that property for a really long time and you may decide that now is the time to sell it because the price of land and housing is going up. But then how do you negotiate on an equal playing field? And so helping folks understand what their house is worth, I think that is something that the county or city could do more of. It's like having appraisers on staff or so folks can help them understand so there's not this like predatory buying. Because at least where I live, I mean, we get letters a lot that say, I'll buy your house. I got phone calls or text messages. And so if you don't really know what your house is worth, or if you're in a vulnerable negotiating standpoint, you may be taken advantage of. And so that is, I think, a concern as well.
I think we got time for one more.
Thank you. Jonathan, I appreciate everything y'all are doing to increase the supply of housing. It's awesome. Question for you about what has the city done to, so you're talking about the city helping, drive down the cost. Somebody wants to put in a accessory unit. So what prevents somebody from just Airbnb-ing this, VRBO? What has the city done to prevent that? Because if that happens, there's no affordability being added to our city. So I'm curious what the council has done on that policy, because I think it's really important.
So that is a tough and good question that I don't have a great answer to. And here's why. There, I think, are competing interests in the city, and the cost of housing is definitely our highest priority and interest. But I will tell you that this council legalized short-term rentals in the city of Raleigh. They were not legal before we were elected. And it is something I campaigned on, legalizing short-term rentals. And here's why. I hear constantly from folks who utilize the income from short-term rentals to pay their own mortgage, to put their kids in daycare. I know someone who had a huge medical expense and quite frankly was in tears, stressed out about, please don't take my short-term rental from me. And so there is some sweet spot where we allow short-term rentals, and yes, we allow them in accessory dwelling units, where it is not negatively soaking up the housing supply, but also allows other folks to stay in their homes by making the income off of it. And so what we did when we approved short-term rentals is we have like a task force and permitting process, and so we get an update every 6 months on what effect it's having on the housing supply, and there may be some regulations that need to be implemented if it becomes a problem. But I am not at a place right now where I would want to ban that again, because I know that they may be compounding the problem for folks that are dependent on the income to pay for groceries or their own mortgage or a car payment, or I can't tell you how many people have come to me and medical bills. And so that's the pressure point, I think. I don't think it can be an all or nothing. I think a lot of the issues we're facing are not black and white or all or nothing, and so there has to be some middle ground, I think.
Jonathan, you have time for one more? I saw a hand over here. I wanted to. Well, we got two more. We can do two more.
Yes. Beyond safe, comfortable, affordable housing, I want Raleigh to be a beautiful, healthy city. You know where I'm going. I want to save older trees and beautiful green spaces and continue to be the city of oaks and not crepe myrtles.
Well, you know this, but for everybody else, we have another text change that is being worked on to talk about tree conservation and replanting. We are the city of oaks, so that I know that is very important. It's weird also in Raleigh because we only get the authority that the state government gives us. And so sometimes there are circumstances where I wish we could do more, but we don't have the authority to do more. And I know we've had conversations about tree conservation, but we are doing everything we can, and that text change is coming down the pipeline, so.
So this will be really quick. A lot of the stuff we've talked about, that you've talked about tonight, is really complicated. I think for those of us in the land use industry, in the development industry, we know that architects can't do this alone, developers can't do this alone, landowners, landlords, citizens kind of can't do any of this stuff alone. But what is something you would suggest kind of to the individuals here of what is something we can do as we walk away, either from tonight or this week, of what can we do to, I guess, try and help make Raleigh better.
So I'm also not in land use at all. I ran for office based on what I thought was right and my personal experiences, but so when we talk about things like AMI and zoning, even sometimes I will get tripped up on that because I still learn as I go. And so it's a problem everybody experiences either directly or they know someone who's experiencing it, but then when you sort of look behind the scenes, it's super complex and technical. But there are little things that we can all do. This may be a controversial one, but it's one I've thought about a lot, is a lot of the changes we've done recently, they don't apply in places that have homeowners associations, HOAs. We have no regulations there. And I read a book that quite frankly changed my perspective on everything called Color of Law, which talked about like how a lot of our zoning laws are implicitly or overtly racist. And we had restricted deed covenants. And when those got invalidated, a lot of HOAs popped up to try to, quite frankly, keep certain people and certain types of housing out of places. And so one thing when we do changes, folks say, well, this won't apply in places that have HOAs, so you shouldn't do it because it's not fair. I was like, no, we need to do it. And if you live in a neighborhood that is an HOA, run for your HOA board or talk to your neighbors and make changes. If you want to be more inclusive, that is something everybody can do. And so I think that's a big one. And I have no problem saying that in any crowd. So yes. And then talk to your neighbors and your friends and family members too. Sometimes everybody registers change as negative. It's just, I think it's inherent with humans. I do it. But so I think whenever you hear of a new apartment complex or a duplex going in your neighborhood, sometimes the initial reaction is, I need to fight this. But I think if we stop and think, what effect is that going to have on my kids or someone I work with or my grandkids? We have to make Raleigh more inclusive. We have to open up more parts of the city for development. We have to allow different types of housing, and we have to shake off this decade-long, this like systemic problem of exclusion. And so I think all of us in some way when we leave here can work on that.
Yeah, can we get a round of applause for Jonathan? Thank you so much. So this is just night one. We have 7 more nights of conversations like this, or 6 more nights of conversations like this. So if you didn't get your question answered, I hope you will come back starting again tomorrow. Doors are at 5 o'clock again, right, Nick? Where's Nick? He's somewhere. 5 o'clock, right? So 5 o'clock. All the folks that you saw milling about today will be back again tomorrow, as well as Jen. She was here somewhere. Where is she, Jen? There's Jen. Jen is running for city council as well. She's going to be leading a booth, answering questions on how different parts of Raleigh could be designed better. So that's your opportunity to get that, your opinion out there. We are so thankful for all our sponsors. So thankful for y'all for coming out. I'm going to keep this really short, I promise. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonathan. Have a good night.